Welcome to Shopper Matters, a podcast brought to you by the Independent Grocers Alliance. And now your host, Michael Laquier.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. Shopper Matters is designed to bring you insights from industry leaders, actionable advice, and the latest thinking on what drives today's shoppers, highlighting the challenges brands face and the opportunities that come from really understanding how people live, shop, and make decisions. I'm Michael Laquier, Vice President of Brand Development for the Independent Grocers Alliance, IGA. It's the world's largest global grocery network with over 7,500 retail stores in over 30 countries, commonwealths, and territories. So today, whether you're a brand manager, commerce marketer, retailer, or just passionate about the future of omnichannel marketing, the Shopper Matters podcast is here to share knowledge from the front lines of the industry and hopefully spark some new ideas. So let's dive in and uncover what really drives success in this dynamic industry, and let's talk about what matters today. So today's episode was inspired by a recent panel at the University of Buffalo called Data in the Age of AI. That's quite a mouthful, right? It was one of those conversations that sticks with you because the questions and answers were pretty broad, but more so the implications were very real. Unfortunately, that session wasn't recorded, and so today we wanted to bring that discussion to the podcast and take it to where Shopper Matters listeners will find the most value into retail, commerce marketing, data readiness, and what leaders actually need to do next. So today I'm pleased to be joined by two guests, which is actually a first for our podcast, Joe Frick, the Senior Vice President of Growth, and Briana Finelli, the Vice President of Commerce Media from Goodway Group. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
Sure. So on this podcast, we typically talk about insights and what's happening with shoppers. So at first blush, data in the age of AI as a topic may seem like a reach. So let's first establish why this conversation matters now. But before we do that, Joe and Briana, if I could get you each to introduce yourself, a little bit about your background so our listeners can understand where you're coming from and the experience that you have. So Briana, ladies first.
Oh, thank you so much. Briana Finelli. I am 3 months in my tenure at Goodway Group, and I have gone independent after about 10 years working holding company side. It's hard to believe I have 10 years of commerce media, retail media experience, but I do, which is kind of rare, I'm learning. So I've seen our industry through all of its ups and downs and all of its changes and things like that. But just really passionate about the space, and I've got a lot of opinions. So I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome, Joe.
Thanks for having me, Joe Frick. Been with Goodway about 2 years, and the prior 30 years, I got the privilege of my career revolving around the commercialization of the internet, which has been a wild ride. My first job was in late 1994, fresh out of college. And became sort of an accidental marketer, which is probably the best way to think about it. This trajectory has taken me through what I feel and what I've come to think about very carefully is data matters and data-driven marketing approaches matter. I spent about 10 years at Oracle Advertising prior to arriving at Goodway, rooting in a foundation from the prior 20 years in direct response marketing, which was all data-driven marketing. So I continue to remain passionate about the presence and the value of data, especially in this kind of emerging frontier, although emerging frontier sounds almost diminutive. It's the speed with which innovation is happening with respect to technology and AI. And so I also have a lot of opinions about this, and I'm excited to talk about them.
Great. It's always fun to have a conversation with two opinionated folks. So we'll see how that goes. So we talked about the topic of data in the age of AI. So we're using a couple of the recent buzzword there. So when that phrase gets spoken, data in the age of AI, what does it mean in practical terms for commerce and for retail media teams right now? Briana, we'll kick off with you, given your experience in commerce media.
Sure. Oh, data in the age of AI. It feels like buzzword soup, but it's also, I've been on a bit of a tear lately about the foundations that ultimately drive AI decision making, and that you need foundational layers in place and data integrity in order for AI to orchestrate or sit on top of or make any of the processes or things that we have go any faster, be more efficient, be any better, right? So the interoperability of everything is actually really important, and data is very valuable. But I think the way that we manage it, the way that we deploy it, how much is too much, how much is too personalized, at what point are we kind of talking one-to-one when we should be talking one-to-many? Those are things I think about.
Yeah, I think to a large extent, though, and Joel asked this question of you, given you birthed the internet, I think you said in your introduction. Hasn't data always been critical, but maybe not as important? We talked back in the day about garbage in, garbage out. So why do you think this topic has become so much more urgent over the past 6 to 12 months?
6 to 12 months is now an eternity in AI development time. And I think a lot of the perspective that I've arrived at is this kind of understanding that now, maybe for the first time truly, we have an opportunity to make a positive impact on the customer's experience with a retailer in a way that previous generations aspired to do so. And in the direct response world, this was very evident. These were the era of the original measurable media, right? Direct mail did not have a lot of competition in the pre-internet days. You had print, you had radio and television, which had its own versions of measurement, but direct mail was eminently measurable. You sent out 100 direct mail pieces, you got back 5 responses. You could immediately credit the success of that campaign to that effort. Now, take the kind of multi-dimensional constituent of the omni-channel customer journey, from that first exposure and first touch all the way down to the purchase of the product, either online or in store, and the complexity of that journey. There is technology that now gives us more than ever the opportunity to track that journey, and data is the fuel that allows us to do it. And so to me, one of the things that comes up again and again in the world of data and AI is, are companies leveraging AI by virtue of asking the right questions that they hope AI can help them solve? I feel like a lot of our consultative conversations with prospective and new clients is sort of taking it back to this fundamental question of AI is an incredible tool set. And when deployed thoughtfully, it can provide myriad benefit. In fact, can unite teams within companies rather than create more fragmentation and so on. What we challenge the brands to think about, and the retailers too, is to think about how you hope AI can help you solve real critical problems. And I think the solution to those problems is complemented not only with the technology of AI, but of course the underlying data. And I feel like that's where the questions really the dimensions of those questions create really interesting conversations as we go down the discovery path with a prospective client.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. Having started my own career in the direct marketing industry, which back then was like the ugly side of marketing. Now it's become the glamorous side. I guess all we needed to throw on it back in the day was AI. But I do disagree with one of the things you said, and I don't think you intended to say it, but you said, how do we use AI to solve the problems versus the way I always think about things, and I think all brands should, is what are the problems we're trying to solve? And then how do we use the tool to apply to do it?
Better said, and that's right. Yeah. Think about the question. 95% of your time should be spent articulating the questions. Once you've articulated the right questions, then you can start to think about solutions to those questions, answers to those questions, and then the thoughtful application of the tools that can help you solve those questions.
Yeah.
Those questions.
To some extent, although you said, hey, 6 months is a lifetime ago, we're still in kind of early days of really AI being a powerful tool to solve the questions that we've perhaps long had. So are we at a point where most organizations are ready for AI, or are many still trying to solve more basic data and workflow problems first? Briana?
Yeah, I was going to say there's this opportunity, I think, that we oversimplify that it is easy to connect a lot of the data that we have access to. And now we're saying data so many times that I'm not sure that it's a real word anymore. But when I think about the retailer environment, right, we're still going to wind up with a lot of walled gardens. There's a lot of technology partners that at least help us to unify, maybe deduplicate, maybe within a channel, maybe, from like a media perspective. I don't think we're at the point on one side when we think about retailers that we're actually at a point where data is democratized and we're able to kind of get to a single consumer. I don't know if it's necessary that we get to that point, right? I think that retailers can prove their value. Like there's value in the data. There's value in the data for brand marketers. That's one of like my favorite things to communicate to brands a lot of the time, is that if you are going after specific competitors, if there's like a specific data set that you need, using like an actual purchase signal over something modeled or panel based is going to be so much more valuable to you. It just may not be your data. It probably belongs to a retailer. I will also be the first person to say that a retailer's data doesn't make sense for a campaign when it's not necessarily the focus, right, of the audience targeting or the persona or whatever it is. Yeah,
I think it goes back to a little bit of what we talked about of are we using AI and then figuring out the problem? Similar to what you just said, are we using commerce media, but what's the objective? So commerce media is a tool, doesn't mean that it's going to solve all the problems in the world.
Yeah.
Speaking of solving all the problems in the world, I think there was something else that was said in there between when Briana, what you said and what Joe said, is that waiting for perfection, we're going to be waiting a long time, right? We're always going to be waiting. I've done a ton of consumer research in my day, shopper research, and it always begets more questions. And so if you go back and say, well, we have now 5 new questions, let's do some more research, you're going to end up with 5 more questions, then keep doing it. If we're waiting for everything to be perfect, then we're going to always be waiting, which is not a good thing, especially at moving at the speed of retail.
Yeah. That's what's happened with in-store. I would say, like in-store. I think like you talk to most merchants, shopper marketing folks, they're like, yeah, the store, right? Like the physical location where most of our purchases still happen. Yes, we monetize and we merchandise that. And then it's always interesting at the media conferences to be talking now about what is effectively like digital out of home happening at point of purchase within a retail environment as being really valuable, which I think is something that marketers knew, that shopper marketers knew, right? Like we come full circle a lot of the time. But that's kind of what's happening there, is that we're waiting for perfection in measurement, in how you can tie this to outcomes, and until you invest, when tactics like that have been proven to work before. It's just about how you measure them and whether you're actually going to hold them to a digital KPI or a sales outcome.
I think it's that downward pressure too, that because technology and sort of a suite, if you think of AI as part of a suite of solutions, then to your point, Briana, like, do we evaluate the tactic on its own merit and what is known, to your point, from the shopper marketing perspective, or are we forcing a build out of a huge unwieldy perspective on the customer journey, when in fact the levers at certain levels, like digital out of home and in store, for example, are known, right? There's no big reveal here. It's being put more in the context of the broader marketing initiative. And that's kind of what I was alluding to at the beginning about technology now offers the promise of the delivery of this wonderful customer experience. The fact of the matter is the suppliers who are willing to invest in it and the retailers who are willing to offer it kind of have to come to a consensus in the middle to understand what's valuable. So it's also, Michael, part of that answering the questions, coming up with meaningful answers to questions. What is important to a supplier in a store? What is important for a retailer to support its own potential revenue aims, or by supplying additional features around loyalty that make the customer experience better? And where can we come to the middle on that? I feel like that's one of the bigger conversations.
We talked about not waiting till everything's perfect, because we'll never hit perfection. Mm-hmm. And we talked about the retailers that you alluded to, Joe, that are doing things well, the brands that are doing things well. So in your experience, what separates organizations that can move from pilot mode to real impact? What are they doing that the ones that aren't successful or the ones that are waiting aren't?
I think part of this is kind of an organizational structure conversation. The ones that are successful have the buy-in from the financial teams to be able to test and learn in the sort of traditional marketing way. Like there's no necessarily sacred ground. You do have to be innovative and push forward opportunities to test new mechanisms. And I think the successful companies get the buy-in from their CFO, essentially, who controls purse strings, and are in a position to be able to demonstrate measurably that the impact of a tactic, a suite of tactics perhaps, or be able to draw and stitch together a customer journey that makes sense to the stakeholders in marketing, the stakeholders in finance, and the KPIs behind it, that they can prove that this is functional and impactful. Without that proof point, without getting the buy-in from the CFO, I do feel like marketers tend to be talking to themselves. And you never have to convince a marketer that the job that you never have to convince a marketer that the job that they do is important. It's nuanced. It's complex. Our job is to try to help them translate that goodness to the CFO so they can get more investment. And so I think that gets to the core of the success.
So you talked about finance as an enabler or potentially a barrier, but is the real barrier a data problem, a systems problem, an operating model problem, or an organizational problem?
I'm so ready for this question. I just had to grab my notepad to jot down the points because there's so many challenges. And at Goodway, we also power retail media networks, right? So we have teams who are hands on keyboard for agencies, for brands, suppliers, actually managing a lot of those campaigns. And so I've gotten a unique view. I went from working with a lot of the CPGs that are suppliers to these retailers and kind of seeing the pieces of the commerce media space that are broken, right? At least in like total media planning, things like that. And now on the back end, I also see how difficult it can be for retailers to meet the expectations and match the expectations of every individual supplier when every brand is measuring and modeling differently and kind of grading their own homework, comparing one network to the other, a retailer to this retailer with one metric, right, across the board. So there's a fragmentation challenge in the way that brands are doing things, a fragmentation challenge in the way that retailers are doing things. Every brand has their own definition of incrementality, right? Every brand can tell you what incremental revenue looks like for them, for their company at the top line. And yet retailers are still making incrementality metrics as if one incrementality metric fits all. And it's not always new to brands. Sometimes it's loyal people buying more often. Sometimes it's same store trips. Sometimes it's higher basket size, right? Diversifying the basket, right? Like there's different levels of incrementality. And so I think, to sum up, where I think a lot of it breaks down is there's a goal up here at the top for a retailer, for a brand. And then we dilute a lot of that when we get down to, well, what KPI and what channel and what thing are we testing and what are we doing over here? Is it going to move the needle? What proxy KPIs can we use to test quickly to figure out if it's going to move the needle? And then just move quickly and see if it moves the needle.
I think it's interesting, sitting on the retailer side, I hear a lot about, and I know you sit on the board of IEB and some other organizations that talk about, hey, for retail media networks need to get their house in order and we need standardized measurement. Mm-hmm. What I don't hear is what you just said of the multiple objectives that brands have. And so if brands are so individualized, they can't expect retail media networks to be so standardized and vice versa.
Totally.
And I know you've sort of coined it and spoken about this translation problem in retail media between strategy and execution. So, what exactly gets lost along the way?
Yeah. I have been on every iteration of the IAB board, every committee, everything for standards. And to be really straight with you, the standards at the very beginning were really that we needed, retailers to define an impression the same way. We needed you to define a click the same way. We needed a PDP visit to be defined the same way, because at the core of that work is leveling the playing field so that advertisers know what they're buying. And that when you're buying impressions the same way that you buy them across a publisher or you're buying them across a streaming platform, that an impression is an impression. that it's viewable, that a human is seeing it. Whether that's going to matter in the age of AI, I don't know, but it matters right now.
We'll talk about that later.
It matters right now. And so that was a lot of the work, was kind of getting everybody on the same page of what's an attributed sale, because you can't overinflate that and grade your own homework and tell brands that you're doing things that you're not doing. We've even established incrementality, like measurement frameworks. And we quite literally tell you, whatever you're looking to measure, it's basically a menu. If anybody has read it, that says, if this is the thing you are trying to measure, then these are the best ways that you can go about that. Here's the relative strength of the different options to measure the different, incrementality there. Not one of them says retailer incrementality should be defined by taking X metric and dividing it by Y metric.
That's really the challenge. These become, so it's part organizational challenge, part transformation. Back to this idea of how fast things are actually changing in terms of the technology available to challenge what are potentially a standard set of KPIs in a framework that Briana just described about the menu approach. But it really requires departments. There's a project management component to this that I think is understated. And when you get an opportunity to work with a brand or a retailer that's sort of seeking a different operating model and operating rhythm, one of the best positions to be in is to be a facilitator to help different divisions. And that can be different divisions within marketing. That can be that marketing and finance connection that I think is so critical to getting the additional investment, to making sure that at least within a shop, within a single retail brand relationship, that there is a continuity of communication. Like, you can basically catalog your operating model so that there's an understanding. You call it the red thread when you're kind of developing storytelling. You've got to be able to draw the thread through all of the effort and all of the outcome, right? Connected commerce, in a sense, is this idea of connecting commercial outcomes to a smart, strategic, data-driven, and media-driven approach at some level. And the only way that works well is if you're all working from sort of the same dictionary of terms, the same understanding. Like Briana, I was on some of the early day committees, especially around retail media best practices at IAB back in 22 and 23. And those conversations, the debates about viewability and what an impression is, I mean, they were so nuanced. And I mean, experts in the room who had significant differences in some of those conversations. I do feel like because commerce media as a percentage of overall media spend continues to grow, it's no longer a nice to have. It's no longer just a set of tactics. Like, it's becoming foundational to how brands have to go to market. And that communication layer that makes sure everybody and every agent, every stakeholder in that process is communicating is huge. One of the biggest parts.
I think technology, you're always going to have increasing improvement of technology, but that change management piece, and the organizational capabilities, regardless of whether it's data, AI, commerce media, et cetera, it can never be understated as a challenge, and can never be kind of overdone, because you've got to continue to improve how the organization thinks about things, and not only how they think about things, but the willingness to go do it.
Yeah. So the silos kind of can't be. There are inherent silos within, I think, every organization that prevent them from being able to actually connect to one central thing. And I think that that's a function of not only agencies, but brands and the retailers kind of meeting at that intersection.
Yeah, so we talked about, you hit on, Briana, AI and agentic commerce. We'll touch on that and what that does or doesn't do to current state commerce media. But does AI help solve this translation problem that you've spoken about? Can it magnify it? Can it help it, depending on the inputs?
It's a good question. I think in the land where everything works perfectly and AI solves all of our problems, yes, a retailer can ingest a brand brief. The brand brief is perfectly informed with all of the data that the brand has access to. It has sales goals for every retailer. It knows exactly who it needs to hit and how many people it needs to convert. And then that can get easily translated to every single retailer, and every media plan is perfectly tailored to meet every shopper with the right directional KPI for that brand based on their definition of good.
So that's
And
the
in the
fantasy world.
that's the fantasy world. And the reality
that Joe
world,
grew up in from direct marketing, right?
We
Power
sometimes
of One
call it
and
Narnia. We sometimes call it Middle Earth.
no, it's not. I don't think that not right now, not with the level of, I think organizations can streamline internal workflows at this point to maybe make some of the processes faster, to maybe allow them to break free from, templated briefs, things like that, to be able to make that translation layer, let them spend more time understanding what the brand is trying to accomplish versus what the retailer wants the brand to accomplish, right? That becomes, I think, a tricky layer in this. So potentially, but I think that's the near term future state. It's like freeing up time to actually be able to spend time to really curate the media plan and execute it in a way that does what the brand needs it to do.
Versus simply taking orders or saying, well, we have these three things, so we're going to deliver those three things regardless of what the brief says.
I have a lot of empathy for the retailers too, though, I have to say, because it's, there's category goals and digital penetration goals, and the goalposts are moving, and like share is very fragile, right? Like a consumer loyalty to products or to retailers, like we have been dipping in and out of price sensitivity and all of these things for consumers. So I can't blame retailers for having simplified models of how we can go to market, ways that we're willing to use our brand guidelines with yours, right? Especially because we're talking about sales organizations that essentially had to become media organizations somewhat overnight, but still have to be sales organizations, and are still kind of trying to compete. So I now consider this my formal national apology to any of the retailers that I worked with who I asked for a media plan revision for. I didn't realize how hard it was. It's
hard too because of those investments. I mean, just to roll out a new set of tactics at scale. If you are in a position to introduce dynamic screens in stores and you kind of pilot it in a region of the country, that is a millions of dollars investment. Mm-hmm. So you also doubly have retailers not only being sales come media organizations, as you've just described, but now they've got debt to pay.
Yes.
They've got significant investments to monetize quickly. And I think that adverb quickly is coming up kind of a lot through this thread and thinking about AI. Perfection is the enemy of good and other pithy phrases like that. But quickly and implementing quickly, the expectations from shareholders at many large publicly held companies, I feel like that's accelerating the quickness of the desire for change. And that's putting additional downward pressure on both the retailers and the suppliers to make faster, profitable decisions operating in a lean environment. I do think there's a hazard that if not thoughtfully implemented, huge adverb around thoughtful and thoughtfully implemented, that it could create more fractionation and bigger divisions in the silos. So to sort of indirectly answer your question, Michael, I think it can serve both, but I think if it's done too hastily, I feel like it can create bigger problems, considerably bigger problems.
Well, we were talking earlier about where problems lie within organizations, silos that Briana talked about. Oftentimes it's where the money sits, and what you just talked about, Joe, in terms of doing things quickly. There's a lot of retailers who have built it because if you build it, they will come, and that didn't always happen in many cases. And so given the promise, and there's a ton of analysts out there talking about the percentage growth and dollars available, et cetera, I think as an industry we've done ourselves a disservice because we're chasing dollars instead of chasing business impact. So,
absolutely.
I agree. I think it's easy to forget that there are two sets of customers in this paradigm: the suppliers who put products on the shelf or in a digital store, and the consumers who are going to those stores, either in real life or digitally. And you don't want to lose the continuity of the customer experience, however you implement new technology and tools to solve real real meaningful problems where there's this downward pressure. And I feel like that's the other abiding piece of all this. Keep an eye on the customer sets. Don't lose sight of the fact that they are fueling all of this and they are the beneficiaries of sound outcomes on the back end of it.
Well, I would say, given our podcast name Shopper Matters, I'd say that audience is the only one that matters, because if we, there's a term, the enshittification of the internet. If you're familiar with that, the fact that, all of Facebook, et cetera, started out lovely communities. And then once they started monetizing it, now you go onto Facebook, you never see anything from a friend. It becomes Times Square. And if we're chasing these dollars in retail, commerce, media, whatever you want to call it, and put screens everywhere in store and monetize every single surface online, guess what? Shoppers won't want to shop. But to some extent, that may all become irrelevant if shoppers are no longer shopping and agents are shopping on behalf of us. So we're building out all this infrastructure. Joe, you said it could take millions of dollars to put screens in store. In store is a little bit different, but online, I know, Briana, you've had some recent debates about the value of agentic commerce. So we're building all this stuff. Is agentic commerce going to wipe away what we've built because it's based on, as you said, impressions? If there's no impressions, if it's a computer eyeball and agentic commerce is happening, what happens to commerce media?
Yeah, I think 10 years ago, everybody said that my refrigerator was going to be able to know the exact weight of eggs that I had on a specific shelf, and then it was going to reorder the same eggs that I like to buy and send them to my house immediately. And that still hasn't happened. We now just send physical humans into the store to pick up our eggs for us. That actually wound up being the future. Amazon Dash buttons, if you remember those, existed for a minute, and it was like, oh, it's going to be this brand forever. I'm going to have this button and I'm totally locked into this. And we really underestimated how much brands like to innovate, number one. And number two, how much consumers like to have control, shoppers like to have control over their shopping journey. So marketers, I think, are hyper fixated on what do we do when no one shops anymore, in the same way that we were hyper fixated on what do we do when no one types anymore because everybody's only going to use their voices. And we're still not even there, right? We consistently overestimate consumer adoption of technology and how far it will actually go. And then I have another drum I love to beat, which is that Gen Z loves the store. We walk around and we say, wow, I can get this in one day. And Gen Z says, I can drive to the store and I can have it in 15 minutes. Have you heard of it? You know what I mean? It's this idea of shipping became shorter and so it's more convenient, as opposed to leaving the house and picking something up, is something that I think we hadn't considered, right? And this return to analog hobbies, Apple's probably going to bring back the Nano. You know what I mean? We're returning to give me fewer screens, give me analog, in a way that I think stores win in. Even as the e-commerce person, I think stores win in that equation.
Well, especially in the area that I operate in, grocery,
Yeah.
right? E-commerce adoption has been huge. That said, 84%, 90% of purchases still happen in store. So we've birthed a huge business. But if you look at it in particular from a in-store lens, people still either love to shop or have to shop, or maybe they're somewhere in the middle. They want to shop. So you talked a little bit about perhaps the hype. So let's talk about maybe we'll throw out overhyped or underhyped. So what's one AI use case in retail or commerce media you think right now is overhyped?
All of them.
I let her say it. We've had this discussion, Briana and I. We talk a lot. We talk about AI more than we probably implement it. I think the same as we started this conversation about AI being a tool that can solve a problem if you articulate the questions you hope it answers and so forth. I think for the consumer, it's the same paradigm. Does AI actually help me shop more efficiently? Is that actually a question that many consumers are asking themselves regularly? Certain cohorts, perhaps a busy household with young children that are getting shepherded around to various activities, and there's an actual need for that. For folks who are looking for an in-person experience and a community, the term experiential is thrown around a lot. It was novel as some D2C companies created virtual environments to try on clothes, but then all of a sudden it became, well, I really want to go and try on these clothes in person. And by extension, it gets back to this idea that, humans interacting face to face. We evolved to have eyeballs on the front of our faces and ears on our sides because this is the social commerce. The age of the internet and all of this great technology has not substituted that. So I think reflexively, we're reacting to something you just pointed out, Michael, about how much is too much, how much exposure is too much, when does it kind of deliver consistently negative returns. And so I think we talk a lot about AI. Implementing it thoughtfully in a way that it actually solves problems is kind of the next part of that evolution. And I think it will start to come out in various places, but not all at once. And I don't think as Briana said, like it's all a little overhyped. It's all a little overhyped. Yeah. Maybe that's
even the ads in a lot of the platforms. And Michael, I think this goes back to your point of the enshittification of the internet, which is the platforms are what they are now to drive usage, to drive, time spent on platform to be attractive to advertisers. That's what these experiences are built to do. And advertising is what ultimately generates revenue for it. And so the experience on the platforms increasingly becomes worse for consumers. And I think we've seen this play out so many times. So sometimes I just think it would behoove us to look at history once in a while and kind of hedge our bets accordingly. Yeah.
So as we're coming to the end of our conversation, what should, our listeners or retailers, brands, commerce leaders, what should a leader in this space do in the next 90 days to be more ready for data in the age of AI?
I think it's never too late to initiate a project. Consider data within your organization. Consider where it resides. Consider how it is architected. If there's a drive to improve and innovate, that the project of starting the discovery within your own organizations to understand kind of qualitatively and quantitatively where data sets reside and where there are breaks in the plumbing. 90% of most of the problems in my professional experience when you're talking about campaign execution exist in the plumbing. Mm-hmm. So the plumbing is worth examining, and the plumbing is not only the data, it's the connectivity between data sets. And by virtue of understanding that, the normalization and creation of common taxonomies within that data, so that at some point, once that is kind of unified and uniform within an organization itself, that to me is usually an important starting point, at which point you can overlay something like an AI agent because it can work off of certain kinds of structured, even somewhat unstructured data, but it needs to be put in a place that a model can be sort of reliably trained on and then audited for its training to make sure that it's valuable. I think that project can't start soon enough.
So similar to the conversation at the beginning of garbage in, garbage out, right? If you've got garbage, 100%. You're going to get garbage regardless of how beautiful or perfect your AI model is. If the underlying infrastructure is rancid, you're going to get some bad results. Briana?
Yeah. Oh, for me, I've got advice for every group. For brands,
bring it
on. For brands, I think, like you've heard it before, and I'm going to say it again. If you've got separate shopper, trade, media, e-commerce organizations that are also held accountable to commercial goals, find a way to unite your briefs in a way that doesn't threaten the financial components of your business that you need to protect. there's so many dollars, in my opinion, that could be working so much harder in the marketplace together to be driving measurable outcomes if they weren't in those silos. And I think brand leaders would see more effective returns, more effective marketing, more effective programs if those dollars were all directed and pointing in the same direction. So also have those conversations with retailers in your JBPs, and retailers in those JBP discussions and annual discussions. Listen to what the brand is trying to accomplish. And I'm not saying to cede everything that you also want to accomplish as a retailer, but find a common ground so that you can help the brand accomplish what it needs to accomplish to show success at its highest level, and be the partner that helped them do that. That will matter more in the long run, in my opinion. And then finally, for agencies, don't be afraid to use the AI technology in front of you. I think there is a, tech revolution fear of, job security, but I joke, like, AI still hasn't solved the billing problem. And all of my agency people listening know what I'm talking about. So until it fixes that, I'm not scared of anything. But I do think what a lot of brands and a lot of our clients want is more strategic thinking from their agencies. And we spend so much time sometimes in the weeds of campaign activation and planning that we don't give ourselves a moment to come out of it. And so, like, I grew up like in Google search, kind of doing that kind of marketing. Like, we had bid rules. I had emails that you could send me when a product was, not in stock or when something stopped running. Now, 10 years later, someone can do something about it, and it's an agent, and they'll, do something about it a little quicker than I might when I check my email in the morning. But take advantage of it. You don't know how much strategic thought it might open up. And I think that's what brands are looking for more than ever right now.
Sure. So what's the one thing you hope listeners will take away from our conversation? Joe?
That shoppers matter. Sorry, I cut you off, Joe. Shoppers matter. Listen to where they're going. Look at what they're actually doing. AI is referring them to products. Your product should be ready, but at the end of the day, follow where the consumer is ultimately finding and buying your product, and go accordingly.
Well, sounds like a paid plug for the Shopper Matters podcast.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Joe.
Hashtag Shopper Matters.
I was going to say practically the same thing. No matter the innovation, no matter the pace with which it's brought into life and implemented, never forget who the customers are. Never forget who the customers are. It is too easy to overcorrect or underdeliver. And shoppers matter. Shoppers care about their experience with a store. Shoppers care with their experience with a brand. That's got to be first and foremost in every decision, the implementation of technology and data discussions.
That's great. Well, thanks again to our guests from Goodway Group, Briana and Joe. For our listeners, if you found value in our conversation today, please subscribe to your favorite podcast platform, leave us a review, a comment, or consider sharing this episode with somebody who works in retail, marketing, or shopper insights. And Joe and Briana, before we leave, if our listeners want to reach out, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
LinkedIn. I am on LinkedIn frequently. Also, jfrick@goodwaygroup.com.
Same thing. You can reach me on LinkedIn or bfinelli@goodwaygroup.com.
Great. Well, thank you both again so much for the conversation. Until next time, I'm Michael Lockyer, and this was Shopper Matters.
Thanks for joining the Shopper Matters podcast. If you like this episode, please subscribe so you'll automatically receive new episodes as they are released.